Hey everyone, I want to tell you about Cozy Earth. It's the world's softest sheets. They keep you cool, dry, and comfy all night long. They're moisture wicking, breathable, and they even get softer with every wash. They have PJ sets. Who can't get behind PJ sets? Valentine's is coming up. Get your wife a pajama set. It's Oprah approved. They have free shipping on orders over $50 and a 100-night sleep trial on those bedding sets and a 10-year warranty. And right now, our listeners get to save 40% off using our code INFOGO at CozyEarth.com. Find the link in the show notes. Luxury, comfort, and cool sleep await you at CozyEarth.com. Welcome to the podcast. I'm William,
And I'm Kat,
and that makes this Info on the Go.
feeding your curiosity with every show.
First of all, this was a listener request. And, I didn't get permission to use the listener's name, so I won't do that. I didn't even know there was such a place in Virginia called Saltville. Did you?
I had no idea. I don't know much about Virginia.
I don't either, but yeah, anyway, I guess let's just jump right into it. To go back, it's the mineral that won wars, first of all, throughout history, through the Romans all the way to whatever. So we're going to take you back to the winter of 1863, where Confederate soldiers were eating salt-cured meat, with civilizations lining up for ration salt, civilians. This is going so spectacular.
We're gonna have a go, aren't we?
I think so. All right, here we go. So let's go back to the winter of 1863, where Confederate soldiers, well, they're eating salt-cured meat. Civilians, they're lining up for ration salt.
Ration salt.
Salt was rationed in the southern Confederate states during the war.
I did not actually.
Yeah, there was a lot of things that was rationed in the South during that time. But anyway, let's get into this Saltville, Virginia.
Okie dokie. There's no gunpowder, no cannon, yet this place may be more important than either.
Yeah, it's a really small town in Virginia, and it has a mineral. Well, that's older than civilization itself.
A site attacked by Union troops for one reason: salt. How did one salt mine become one of the most strategic locations in America?
First, I guess we really got to kind of figure out why salt really mattered, because this was a time before refrigeration. No electricity, no ice boxes, no cold storage, and salt really meant survival because salt meant you could preserve the food by drawing out moisture, which slowed bacterial growth, and it could turn your salt cured meats into months or years, and you could have that, you know, especially during those hard winter months where food was hard to find, right?
Right.
So to put it simply, without salt, excess food would just simply rot.
Then there's, of course, the meat curing. Salted pork, beef, fish, and game became portable protein. Armies marched on salted meat. Sailors crossed oceans because salted fish didn't spoil.
Yeah, and then you had the leather tanning. Raw animal hides were rubbed with salt to prevent decay before tanning. This made shoes, armor, belts, saddles, anything that you could think of that was made of leather. Well, it had to have salt to do it. And this was key to agricultural warfare.
And then livestock survival. Animals need salt to live. Salt licks kept herds healthy, especially inland regions. Losing access to salt could collapse an entire herd. In many places, access to salt meant the difference between stability and starvation because everyone needed it and needed it constantly, salt became far more than seasoning. It was currency. Salt was traded by weight and sometimes used directly as payment. The word salary comes from the Latin salarium, linked to Roman soldiers' salt allowances.
Yeah, and then you had tax base, right? Governments quickly realized salt was impossible to boycott. Everyone used it, taxed it, and you had guaranteed revenue. Uh, so, honestly and truly, you can't live without salt, period. I don't think any animal can live without salt.
No.
And if you control salt, well, you can control the food supplies. Salt mines, evaporation ponds, and trade paths were fiercely guarded. Entire cities rose around salt sources. I know we're talking about Saltville, Virginia, but I think we need to go back in time just a little bit to give some global context. What do you think?
Absolutely. First, we'll start with the Roman salt roads. Rome built major highways like the Via Salaria specifically to transport salt from coastal flats to inland cities. Salt helped feed legions and unify the empire. Heavy salt taxes sparked uprisings across history. In France, the hated Gables salt tax fueled resentment leading up to the French Revolution. And in India, British salt monopolies provoked resistance, most famously Gandhi's Salt March in 1930. Ooh, I remember doing uh, school stuff on Gandhi's Salt March.
Hold on, I'm gonna add it to the shopping list. Give me a second.
Really?
Yeah, because I've never heard of it.
Really?
Yeah, hold on.
Salt wasn't just economic, it was political and emotional, touching daily life in ways few other resources really did.
Now, let's go to Virginia because early colonial salt attempts, from the beginning, Virginia's survival, well, really depended on securing salt, yet it was far from easy. So, in early Jamestown, those settlers, they tried boiling salt water and evaporating the brine along the coast. The process was slow, it really was fuel intensive and most always unreliable. Storms, humidity, and limited equipment meant salt production barely met local needs. And then you had the Eastern Shore, which offered better access to salt water, and colonists experimented with solar evaporation ponds, but output remained small, seasonal, and it just really didn't hold up because of the weather and attacks and just things like that. So for decades, Virginia relied heavily on imported salt, mostly from Europe or the Caribbean, but it was expensive and risky, to say the least.
Coastal salt was helpful, but inland salt was strategic. You had blockades. In times of war, British naval power cut off salt imports almost overnight. Without salt, food spoiled, livestock suffered, and armies weakened. And then distance from the coast. Moving salt inland over primitive roads was slow and costly. Mountain communities and frontier settlements were especially vulnerable.
So an inland salt source meant independence from foreign powers and coastal choke points. So the discovery of Saltville's brine in Virginia. So long before the Europeans arrived, the land itself, well, it advertised the secret. You had natural salt licks, which attracted animals, bison, elk, deer, and other animals. Well, they gathered at these mineral-rich springs in what is now southwestern Virginia. Hunters followed these herds and found salt. Well, indigenous peoples harvested salt from these brine springs for food preservation, trade, and ritual use well before the Europeans ever arrived, and the area was known and valued centuries before the Europeans.
European settlers eventually realized these springs weren't just curiosities, they were industrial gold. The geography of Saltville, which, Saltville's importance came from what lay beneath it, was the Appalachian Basin. The region sits atop ancient seabeds, remnants of oceans that evaporated hundreds of millions of years ago. Underground brine deposits, water passing through buried salt layers, emerged as concentrated brine, far easier to process than seawater. This geology turned a remote mountain valley into one of the most valuable natural resource sites in early America.
Yeah, I mean, think about that. You don't have to live on the coast. You have this huge salt reserve that's inland. Early commercial development, which came in the late 1700s to the early 1800s. As demand grew for salt, well, so did production. Entrepreneurs built furnaces, kettles, and boiling houses to evaporate the brine on a large scale. So, Saltville, Virginia, well, it became a regional hub supplying salt for meat curing, leather production, livestock feeding, frontier survival. And by the early 19th century, Saltville was producing millions of pounds of salt annually, making it a cornerstone of Virginia's economy and a strategic asset in future conflicts.
How Saltville really worked here as the science and the labor of it all. You had brine wells. Saltville's operation began underground, pumping salt-rich water from underground, where workers drilled wells into natural brine deposits left behind by ancient seas, and the brine was far saltier than seawater, which was pumped to the surface using hand-powered and later mechanical pumps. But this concentrated brine made Saltville efficient. Less water to remove meant less fuel and faster production.
Yeah, so let's get into that evaporation process. But first of all, I think really you touched on it. Seawater is not as salty as what this brine was coming up from the ground, right?
Right,
So,
because all the water had evaporated from this brine
yeah,
millions of years ago.
and really kind of concentrated that salt. So you still have to get some water out of it. And that evaporation process, well, turning that brine into salt was simple in concept, but brutal in execution because you had iron kettles. And these were long rows of massive iron kettles, some holding hundreds of gallons of salt over open flames. And the brine was poured in and boiled continuously until it, well, just became salt. Then you had wood fired furnaces. And, well, these fires burned day and night beneath these kettles. As the water evaporated, salt crystals formed, and it was skimmed off and dried and packed into barrels. And the work was hot, loud, relentless. Summer or winter, these kettles never stopped. First of all, this is going to be a very labor intensive process. I know we talked about seawater as more labor intensive, but still, you're keeping these kettles full. You're keeping that fuel to the fire. Like it's nonstop, right?
Right. I mean, and not only that, like, this is also before labor laws.
Well, you had enslaved people too,
Hmm. So it just doesn't sound like a very ethical work environment, maybe was going on.
No,
What I'm
no,
trying to
no,
say.
no. And yeah, I think the enslaved, you're gonna have men, women, and children that performed much of the hardest labor, from hauling the brine, cutting the wood, tending the fires. They're gonna carry the brunt of all of this work, especially before the Civil War and possibly after, because the Jim Crow laws, whatever.
Right. And not only that, you had hire laborers, which were often local farmers or migrants that took on physically demanding jobs for wages, especially during peak production periods. Um, You had skilled technicians as well, which were the furnace operators, engineers, and supervisors, which managed the kettles. They also controlled evaporation rates and maintained equipment. Their expertise kept production efficient and even profitable. So, Saltville functioned like an early factory town, industrial before the industrial age really fully arrived.
So, really, the scale of production, right?
Hmm.
Because it's going to be huge. At its height, Saltville was enormous. By the 19th century, thousands of bushels per day at its peak. And by the mid 1800s, Saltville was producing millions of pounds of salt annually, supplying households, farms, meat packers, armies across the South and the Midwest.
There were a few inland sites in North America which matched its output. Uh, there is an environmental impact. The cost of salt wasn't just human, it really reshaped the land. You had deforestation, where vast forests were cut down to fuel the furnaces. Hillsides were stripped bare to keep the fires burning, and the smoke and the heat. Thick smoke filled the valley, with constant heat altered the local climate, and pollution settled over nearby communities. So Saltville became a landscape dominated by industry, a working valley, not a pastoral one.
I guess now we just need to get into how Saltville was a strategic target during the Civil War. Well, and mainly it was because the Confederate Army, well, it depended on this salt. And by the time the Civil War erupted, salt was no longer a convenience. It was really a necessity, preserving meat for armies, because the Confederate armies, they relied heavily on salted pork and beef. And without salt, well, that meat would spoil. It would just go rancid within days, especially in the southern heat. And I know we've talked about the humidity. Um, so salt meant soldiers could be fed far from farms and supply deposits, right? And then,
Right.
you know, you also had to feed your civilians because salt was just as crucial on the home front as it was for the army. So families needed it to preserve food, cure hides, and, well, keep livestock living during these shortages. And I think as imports collapsed under the Union naval blockades, domestic salt production, well, it became a matter of survival.
And the Virginia legislation got involved. Recognizing salt's importance, the Confederate state of Virginia intervened directly. The state control of salt production, where they took over large portions of Saltville's operations to ensure military supply came first. And then laws capped prices and restricted private sales, where salt was allocated to armies, hospitals, and essential civilian uses. Salt was no longer a commodity, it was a regulated wartime resource.
So, how crucial was Saltville? Well, Saltville, Virginia, it became the backbone of the Confederate salt supply, uh, producing the majority of the Confederate salt. At its peak output, Saltville, 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 yeah. At its peak output, Saltville provided a significant share, often cited as the majority of usable salt for the Confederacy. Losing Saltville would mean hunger, spoilage, and collapse, not just at the front, but at home as well. And Kat, I say before we get into the Union intelligence part of it, I said we should take a small break. What do you think?
Sounds good to me.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
William, I know how you love matcha tea with coconut milk.
Yeah, it's clean energy without a crash.
Then you'll love Mantra Matcha. They offer super premium ceremonial matcha and six superfood infused flavors made from the finest, youngest tea leaves for a naturally sweet, ultra smooth taste.
With each flavor, it's infused with powerful superfoods like cacao, ginger, and goji berries. And they also have those classic favorites like banana cacao, strawberry lemon, cinnamon goji berry, plus superfood berry, ginger beet, and rosehip dragon fruit. It's organic, non GMO, gluten free with 0 grams of sugar. You can enjoy it like me, or maybe hot or in a smoothie like Cat. Every purchase helps provide meals to kids through No Kid Hungry.
It's at mantramatcha.com. Get 15% off using our code INFOGO at checkout. Both links are in the show notes.
Hey, everybody, we want to tell you about strong coffee. Every morning it starts with a choice. You can settle for just coffee, or you can rise up with strong coffee. And it's the world's strongest cup of joe. Strong isn't just a drink, it's a movement. It stands for striving to reach our natural greatness.
It's born from one simple need to be better. They rebuilt coffee from the ground up, infusing organic coffee with collagen, protein, nootropics, and functional ingredients that fuel your body and sharpen your mind. No crash, no compromises, just clean energy, focus, and flavor that fires you up.
Yeah, so whether you're chasing kids, chasing goals, or chasing greatness, don't just do it with coffee, do it with strong coffee. And our listeners can save 20% off just by using our code INFOGO at checkout. Hey, if you're looking for your favorite band or sports team or TV show, check out Old Glory. They've been in operation since 1969 and they have over 300,000 items. They have from the Beatles all the way to Metallica, NFL, NBA. It really doesn't matter what you're looking for. They have tees, hoodies, hats, gifts, everything a true fan could ever want. And it's family owned and operated. They have fast shipping, free standard delivery on every order. And you know what? Our listeners get a 15% off at checkout using our code INFOGO. You can find the link in the show notes.
So now that we're back, let's dive into Union intelligence. The Union understood exactly what was at stake here. Well, military intelligence reports and prisoner interrogations pointed to Saltville as a logistical linchpin, where Union commanders recognized that destroying salt production could weaken the Confederacy faster than battlefield victories alone. So Saltville became a high value industrial target.
Yes, so the raids of 1864, where Union forces struck, the first battle of Saltville was Union cavalry attacked the works, but were repelled by Confederate forces. But the aftermath included horrific violence, particularly against wounded black Union soldiers. And the second battle of Saltville, which was in December of 1864, Union troops returned with a greater force. This time, they succeeded in damaging kettles, wells, and infrastructure, temporarily halting, salt production at Saltville, Virginia. So, Saltville became one of the few places where industrial facilities themselves became the battlefield during the Confederate during the Civil War.
So the Union strategy here wasn't occupation, it was destruction. They destroyed the kettles, which were iron kettles. They smashed them or rendered them at least unusable, which halted evaporation. They killed livestock. The mules and oxen that powered pumps and hauled supplies were very much targets. Sad. Get it, but sad.
Yeah.
And they disrupted brine wells. Wells were damaged or contaminated, making immediate restart impossible. And this was just an early example of total war aimed at crippling supply chains rather than seizing territory.
But what about that human cost? The strategic importance came at a terrible price. You had violence. Fighting was brutal, often hand to hand. Um, and then the massacres of wounded African American soldiers after the first battle. Well, it was one of the war's darkest episodes. And Saltville's legacy, it includes both industrial achievement and profound human suffering. I think we should take a moment and just kind of reflect on how important Saltville was before, during, and after the war.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it seems to be the major hub for salt in
Yeah.
general.
For the South, for sure.
Right. Um, so it really just kind of messed with the Confederate soldiers. Re-
Yeah, but I think too, when you have the African American soldiers that are fighting there, I feel like they had a lot of suffering due to the Confederate Army. Like, I just you get both sides of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I mean, like they're trying to defend this strategic salt mine because they know how important it is to the Confederate food supply and to the homestead itself. Then you have the Union soldiers that know how important it is and they're trying to take it out. I just feel like, it just leads to a very brutal battle, no matter how you put it.
very, very bloody.
Yeah.
Very much. Oof. You know, and when the Civil War ended, Saltville was a shadow of its former self. The kettles that were destroyed, the wells that were damaged, the livestock and equipment that were gone. Production resumed, but it was slowly and very uneven. The Confederacy's collapse also meant the loss of government control and guaranteed demand. So it really forced Saltville back into a competitive marketplace.
But Saltville adapts. Salt production alone was no longer enough. So they moved into chemical production. As an industrial chemistry advanced in the late 19th century, well, Saltville's brine became valuable for far more than just regular table salt.
And it had industrial brine use. The brine fed new chemical processes, turning Saltville into an early chemical manufacturing center rather than a traditional salt works. The town pivoted from food preservation to industrial chemistry as well.
Into the 20th century, by the late 1900s, Saltville entered a new phase: chlorine. It was used for sanitation, bleaching, and later water treatment and chemical weapons research during World War One. And then you had soda ash, which is sodium carbonate, and it is essential for glass making, detergents, 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 paper production, and textiles. So these industries, well, they were tied to Saltville to national and global manufacturing networks.
I use soda ash and tie dye.
Really?
Mhm. That falls kind of under textiles, I guess.
Yeah. We were gonna do an episode on tie-dye and you were gonna kind of walk through that, remember?
We haven't got there yet, I guess.
No, no, we haven't. There's a lot on that shopping list.
hmm There's very much lots of distractions, lots of squirrels everywhere in there.
Yeah, and then I got a friend of mine that does this true crime thing that has asked us to do something that I'm working on. I'll talk to you about it off air, but it's going to be interesting for sure.
Sounds good. Sounds
For
good.
sure.
But you can even make soda ash by baking soda in your oven.
Huh. I didn't know that.
I mean, because baking soda is just sodium bicarbonate. So you're just baking out one of the carbon atoms in the molecules. If you want to get all chemistry, sciencey.
Factoid.
Factoid. Things you learn when you're trying to figure stuff out. Um, but there are environmental consequences still. The industrial success came at a cost. The pollution, decades of chemical discharge, contaminated soil and waterways, especially the North Fork of the Holston River. By the late 20th century, Saltville faced extensive environmental remediation efforts. Cleanup became one of the town's largest ongoing industries, funded by corporations and government agencies. The land that once sustained life was now something that had to be repaired.
And then the community impact, right? Saltville's people lived through repeated cycles of hope and hardship. You know, in the job sector, well, industry provided stable, well-paying work for generations of families. Boom and bust cycles. Well, when plants expanded, the town thrived. But when they closed or downsized, unemployment surged and populations, well, it declined. So Saltville became a familiar, American story, a community built around a single resource, resilient, but still vulnerable to the forces far beyond the control of the townfolk.
Right. You know, what is left of Saltville today? Is it just memory? Is it ruins? Is it a legacy? You know, well, first of all, Saltville no longer roars with furnaces, but it hasn't vanished. There are historic markers, there are roadside plaques and interpretive signs quietly tell the story of brine wells, salt kettles, and Civil War battles. They stand where industry once dominated the valley, and the ruins of the saltworks. You have foundations, earthworks, and scattered remnants hint at the scale of what once operated there. To the untrained eye, they look ordinary, yet they powered armies and sustained millions. Local historians, preservation groups, and community advocates work to protect what remains, balancing remembrance with environmental recovery and modern use.
Yeah, so Saltville survives more as a memory than machinery. Few Americans really know this story, despite its importance. Saltville is largely absent from textbooks and popular history. It lacks the sweeping visuals of Gettysburg or Antietam. There are no guard monuments to salt kettles or brine wells. Yet, without places like Saltville, many famous battles could never have been fought at all. I, th- I am, you know me, you've known me long enough to know that I am a history guy. It doesn't matter what kind of history it is, I'm into it.
Right.
And I think little places like this, whether they be Confederate, whether they be Union or whatever, they need to be preserved. They need to be talked about. They need to be championed by somebody. And I don't think they should be forgotten in textbooks or history at all. There's too much already lost to history.
Agreed. Famous battlefields that are marked, protected, and visited by millions, and you have forgotten industrial sites that are often abandoned, overgrown, or erased, despite being just as essential to wartime survival. History tends to honor the moment of combat, not the infrastructure that made combat possible.
So we're going to take a moment to reflect. We remember generals, but forgot the minerals that fed the armies. Saltville reminds us that wars are won as much in boiling houses and supply depots as they are on hillsides and battlefields. Saltville, well, it's the early example of strategic resources that control the outcome. You have government control of industry, wartime necessity justified state takeover, rationing, and price controls, patterns repeated throughout modern history. And Saltville was an early test case of, well, industrialized warfare.
You know, there are modern equivalents today. Today, salt has different names, but the logic is still the same. It's oil, which fuels transportation, militaries, and economies. Rare earth minerals, which are essential for electronics, renewable energy, and even defense systems.
You
And
know,
then,
we, so when you talk about those rare earth minerals, there's only certain places on Earth certain minerals can be mined for like microchips or certain kind of electronics. So you're talking about those same kind of warfare if it ever happened that way anyway.
right.
Anyway,
And
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
you're fine, you're fine. And then, of course, you have semiconductor supply chains, which is a handful of facilities that now underpin global technology and economic stability. Disrupt any of these, and modern life stumbles really fast.
Yeah, so Saltville sits on one of the oldest industrial sites in North America. Humans have been extracting salt in Saltville area for, well, thousands of years, from indigenous peoples to colonial settlers, making it one of the longest continuously exploited mineral sites on the continent.
Factoid. There's also the Ice Age megafauna that once gathered at Saltville's salt licks. Long before humans, mastodons, mammoths, giant ground sloths, and saber-toothed cats were drawn to Saltville's natural salt springs. Fossils found there rank among the most important Ice Age discoveries in the eastern U.S. So, I mean, I guess Manny, Sid, and what was the saber-toothed tiger's name?
Oh my gosh, what was his name?
Diego.
Diego. Okay.
So, so Manny, Sid, and Diego were hanging out in the salt flats there in Saltville.
Those were some good movies, though, you know?
I love them. I love them just like I love Shrek.
I, you know that little squirrel? I love Shrek too, but that little squirrel, he really had a hard time with that acorn, didn't he?
All the time. There was a scrat. Yeah. There was never a dull moment with him.
No, there wasn't. I used to love those. I,
Little
s-
short. Oh,
you know, that's gonna be one of those timeless movies that you can still watch, you know?
absolutely.
Um, Good call out. You made me want to go watch Ice Age now. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So,
Anytime.
you're welcome. Why am I thanking you for that? Um, so Saltville was guarded like a military base before the Civil War. Even in peacetime, salt works were protected by armed guards. Well, because theft of salt could cripple communities and destabilize regional markets. How crazy is that?
That is wild.
I mean, salt is really worth its weight in gold. I mean, I know today we have, desalination plants and all these other things where we get salt from. But think about these early people. Like,
They were doing what they could with what they had.
yeah, I mean, salt is a vital part of human civilization. I feel an episode coming on.
Absolutely. A single destroyed kettle could halt production for weeks. Salt kettles weren't interchangeable cookware. They were custom cast iron. They were expensive and difficult to replace, making them prime Union targets during raids.
Yeah, I mean, think about that. Like, there was no mass production. So if you lost one of these, it could bring you down, yeah, for weeks because, well, I didn't even think about that. Good call out.
Yeah.
Saltville helped feed both sides of the American frontier, you know. So before the Civil War, Saltville preserved food for Western expansion, which helped supply settlers moving into Kentucky, Tennessee, and, well, far beyond. And that's another,
Factoid.
I didn't,
Um,
I never really thought about that either. But yeah, you're going to have salt if you're going to go westward where there's no
anything.
production. Yeah.
There was nothing there at the time. And it was one of the Confederacy's most important non-battlefield targets. Union planners ranked Saltville alongside rail hubs and ironworks, proof that logistics mattered just as much as armies, even in the 1860s.
Well, I never would have thought about that. In fact, before this topic came up from a friend of mine, that was a listener request, I'd never heard about this place. I'd never heard about this battle or how important Saltville, Virginia really was, or how strategically it was important to both sides of in the Civil War for the Union to have to take it out to help cripple the Confederacy and for the Confederacy to really depend on it. I never heard of that.
Right. No, me either.
This has been one of those intriguing episodes. And one of the Civil War's worst racial atrocities occurred in Saltville. After the first Battle of Saltville, wounded African American Union soldiers, they were outright murdered rather than treated, an event that would later become part of the post-war congressional investigations. That is heartbreaking all within its own.
Right.
And I'm sure Saltville wasn't the only place that this happened to African American Union soldiers.
No, most certainly not.
Yeah.
Saltville quietly became a major chemical town. After salt production declined, Saltville reinvented itself as a chemical manufacturing center, producing chlorine and soda ash, which was essential to 20th century industry.
And much of the town's modern landscape, well, it was reshaped by cleanup, not construction. So, late 20th century environmental remediation altered riverbanks, soil layers, and industrial footprints, meaning what you see today is partly the result of repair, not development.
Well, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I thought this was really interesting, to be honest with you.
I thought so too. It's definitely nice to think about the infrastructure really behind economies and soldiers, if it comes to that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think you have the celebration part of it, right? Then you have the memorial part of it where the African American Union soldiers were just murdered. You have the historical part of it that helped expand the United States. I mean, there's so much history in Saltville, Virginia. This is a destination that I want to go to now.
Oh, same, same. Let's go.
Man, all right, so yet another place on the map that we're trying to go to.
Our map is getting pretty pin-filled.
Well, I think by the time we finish our shopping list, yeah, we're just might as well just go to every place on the continent on planet Earth. And
Yeah.
oh, hold on. We should go to every place on planet Earth and interstellar Earth
Yes.
and maybe Mars.
Ooh, well,
Space travel is out of the question for me. I'm sorry.
yeah, same. It's gonna take way too long to get there and back from Mars.
Well, and and like I told you in one of our other episodes, I I have motion sickness, so I don't think I can do it no way.
I mean, you go fishing on a boat.
Well, I take lots of Dramamine before I do that.
Oh, well, then you're fine. You could just medicate. It's good.
No, it's not good because long like when we do long road trips or something like that and we're with the fam, I'm like, hey, either I gotta drive or I gotta ride shotgun, one of the two. I can I cannot do the back seat. And um my son-in-law has this party van and he rents it out or whatever. And we went to go pick it up and I was like, I really kind of need to ride up front, but I went on and got in the back because I was being polite and everything. And we're doing all this stop and go, and I'm like, yeah, I'm looking at my wife like, I don't think I'm gonna make it. But I did.
Oh, well, good, good. All's
Yeah,
well that ends well, yes?
yeah. All right,
I
let's
used to
wrap
get,
this thing up.
yeah, I used to get real bad car sick when I was a kid, so I get it.
No, I look, I did as a kid, I do as today, but as long as I'm riding up front and I'm seeing where we're going, like when I go intercoastal fishing, I take a little bit of Dramamine the night before, I take some the morning of, so that I don't worry about, because there's really not a lot of waves and stuff, because you're in a lot of river systems when you're fishing like that,
Hmm.
versus where you're out on the open ocean. And yeah, anyway.
Well, if you would like to support this podcast, tell a friend and help get the word out.
If you would like to help Kat and I keep the show going, you can do so at Patreon. You can find that link in the show notes.
And as always, William and I want to thank you for listening.
Whether you've been with us from day one or just tuning in, thank you for listening.
Absolutely. Join the Facebook group at Info on the Go.
I think Kat is doing something over there uniquely every day now. And you can either share with us your show ideas or post something uniquely yourself.
Right. Or simply ask us a question.
But whatever you do, wherever you're listening to us at, make sure you hit that follow button.
Send us a text using the link in the show notes or leave a review.
Leaving that review really does help others find us. If you leave it, we'll read it. You can also email us at,
Info on the Go podcast at gmail.com.
and you can find that link in the show notes. Till next time.
Stay curious.